Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Harris-Picarilli. I'm a gallery assistant and curatorial intern for this summer for Alfa Art Gallery. I'm joined here by artist Dan Finaldi, who will be presenting work in our upcoming 2024 Oil, Sculpture, and Mixed Media exhibition. Dan Finaldi is an accomplished painter who currently resides in Highland Park. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. First, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great. I'm so glad that we could have you here with us today. To start off, I read in your artist biography that you grew up in Rochester, New York. How did growing up in a diverse working class immigrant neighborhood influence your artistic vision and storytelling approach in your paintings?
Well, in retrospect, I could say it did. At the time, as a child, I really don't know because you're a kid. But um, uh, immigrant people of all persuasions are storytellers.
Mhm.
They intermingle, they stop, they talk. Now, this is way before the age of technology too. So you have to understand that storytelling was part and parcel of community living. When you were out on the stoop, people from the
Mhm.
neighborhood would stop by and they would tell stories about their life, ask you things, you would tell stories. You became a natural storyteller and a listener of someone else's story.
Yeah.
So that was a major part of community living. And I think it's ancient. It's very, very old, and that kind of culture comes to America in the immigrant populations. And this cuts across all immigrants. I'm Italian American, but there were Jewish, Ukrainian, Polish, all in the same vicinity, in the same area. I lived in an enclave of Italians that lived across the street from this big factory that made men's suits, a very famous factory that made men's suits. And that period in time in Rochester, a lot of immigrants came to that area as tailors, seamstresses, shoemakers. They
Mhm.
they it was skilled labor to come into that, but they were also peasant class people, but they were laborers. So I grew up in that environment, and uh, culture of being Italian is you are filled with imagery. So calendars had images of great master paintings. Your monthly calendar, in an American home would, I don't know, it might be just a calendar with some pictures, random pictures. But in an Italian home, an Italian calendar, you would have pictures of all the great masters. So before I knew any of the great masters or who they actually were, I would sit and actually draw copies of these masterworks of Titian, Tintoretto, Giotto, uh,
Mhm.
Raffaello, Leonardo. I didn't know who they
Yes.
were, but I
Mhm.
would be drawing from them. So it was just part of the culture, part of growing up.
Yes. Mhm.
And I had a natural aptitude for drawing. I mean, some people are born with a natural aptitude, some are athletically talented, some are musically talented. I happen to be visually talented and I could draw from a very early age, and I had a strong desire to draw. As a child, I would draw on furniture, on the walls, on any little piece of paper I could find. So it was just part of who
Mhm.
I was, and I think that
Yes.
that's true with a lot of visual artists who become, visual artists throughout their lives. So it's a
Mhm.
primary calling.
Yes. Is sort of a storytelling in a different way as opposed to orally saying something like
Well,
everybody.
it's one of the original. I think if it is
Mhm.
the original. It's a way of telling stories.
Yeah.
Pictograms are before written language, right?
Yes, I
I
believe so.
mean, so you have cave paintings that
Mhm.
predate written language by tens of thousands of years. It tells incredible narratives of incredible hunts and battles and figures running, and God knows what these stories were, but they're epic stories,
Mhm.
painted on walls of caves.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds cool. Thank you. And then just another question of my own that since you brought up just painting or mimicking paintings from like great Italian artists. I know a lot of those artists focused a lot on like the figure or like the perfect figure during that time. How
Yeah.
did that maybe influence your figurative drawing?
Well, I mean, again, this is all as a child, you just do what's around you, and
Mhm,
I just happened to be good at drawing people, and I had a real attraction to drawing people. So I would draw these figures that you would see in. They were not just Italian masters. I remember one picture. There was a Dürer, a beautiful reproduction of a Dürer that I
mhm,
remember drawing it. I remember the names of the artists that I drew. So there was one gorgeous Dürer. There was also a Danish. I think there was a Roger van der Weyden
yes.
in that calendar, and I did a Roger van der Weyden altarpiece. Beautiful
Yeah.
figures, beautiful.
Mhm.
But anyway, I think that it just strengthened my natural inclination. And I remember as a kid doing portraits of my family. People would sit for me, and I would do little tiny portraits with
Oh,
pencil and with pen.
okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
great. Um, Moving on. So, I know that you went to Pals,
New Paltz.
New Paltz, sorry,
Yeah.
for
New
your
Paltz, New
secondary
York. Yeah.
schooling. But I was just wondering, could you tell us a little bit about what your college education was like before SUNY Paltz?
My education, I mean, I went to a public school that was pretty, average. It wasn't an educational experience that was typically, I would say challenging at all. It was just an average, typical suburban high school. By that time, we had moved away from the city and we moved to a suburb of Rochester, and I didn't like it there very much. I liked city living. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
at any rate, the teacher was disinterested. I really wasn't inspired by the art teacher in my high school, so I wasn't prepared really to go into a university program with any sort of portfolio because he was disinterested and he didn't prepare us. And I knew that, so I went to community college first because I
Yeah.
knew that I didn't have a portfolio that would get me into any kind of school. The other thing is I didn't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to move away to a school away from home, I would have to have money to pay for it. And my family wasn't about to support me to be an artist. So that was ridiculous. I mean, and they made it very clear that they had no interest in supporting
Mm-hmm.
um, ambition to be an artist unless I could find a practical application for it. So I went to community college to try to do that. Number one, it was very affordable. I was working, so I had money saved. And number two, I thought, well, this community college is well known for visual arts, and maybe I could find a way. So I thought of illustration. That's what I was thinking of when I was a kid. I didn't know. So I started taking classes in the community college, and the professors immediately the atmosphere in that school was just a whole new world. The professors were just absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And then they inspired the talented and interested young students to get involved. So they would have art club meetings. They planned trips to New York City. They would take us to the museums. They introduced us to active artists in the community of Rochester. And before long, I started to see myself more as a fine artist rather than a commercial artist. I didn't really see myself as a commercial artist. And I think part of it was I didn't want anyone to tell me what to draw, what to paint, what to construct. I wanted it free to do what I wanted to do. So I remember we met all these wonderful local artists. They were very encouraging. And we took this trip to New York City and we went to the Met and we went to all the museums. But my first experience as 18-year-old kid going to the Met, having never been to New York. Well, I know that's not true. I went to New York once, a senior trip in high school, but I didn't know anything. But my first real trip to the Met, as it was when I was 18, and they just let us go. They let us just walk around and be on our own. And I found myself wandering through all the various galleries and different rooms, and I landed in um, the galleries that focused on French painters, especially Cézanne and all that 19th century French group. And I remember being extremely moved And it was sort of, I just couldn't even, it was like an out of body kind of thing, like a spiritual
Hmm.
thing. The paintings were communicating to me on a level that I couldn't really articulate. It was a very deep, profound experience, like a religious experience.
Hmm.
So afterwards, the professors would ask us, or the one professor that I had, he sat down and he would ask us, well, so what was your impression of the museum? He asked all of us, you know. And I remember being sort of like just dumbfounded. I couldn't really even articulate it. I just said, well, it was Cezanne. I remember saying Cezanne. And then I said Cezanne, and I said, it's color. And he said, oh, you're a painter. And that was all I needed to hear. I knew it sort of intuitively, but then I heard it from this outside person and I said, oh my God, I'm a painter. So
Yeah.
it was sort of the trajectory. It changed completely from that. I went into fine art and I said, I'm a painter.
Hmm.
So I started to prepare and change my whole curriculum and everything to study more painting and fine art. And I quickly developed a really good portfolio. By the time I finished uh, the community college, that was Monroe Community College, I had had a one-person show in their library. It was a very advanced show for a 19-year-old, really. And and then somehow the chairman of RIT, the art department of RIT, which is Rochester Institute of Technology, not a bad school, a really good school for art. He contacted me and he said, you know, you would really do well here. I think he saw my show. He said, you would really, really do well here. Would you mind applying? Would you want to apply? But at that point, I was geared towards leaving Rochester and going to the New York area.
Yeah.
So I said, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to do that. So I followed my tendency to leave Rochester and to go downstate. Rochester is upstate Western New York, near the Lake Ontario, and you know SUNY New Paltz is down towards Manhattan,
Yes.
just about 80 miles north of Manhattan. And
Yes.
Manhattan was going right into Manhattan was a step too far for me as a 19-year-old. I just couldn't see myself doing it. I was too skittish.
Hmm.
But going to a campus right outside of Manhattan where I could take a bus in 80 miles away, I thought, okay, this is a good stepping stone. So I applied to New Paltz and I got into their BFA painting program.
Now that you're at SUNY New Paltz, you've mentioned in statements that the environment was dominated by more abstract expressionism as opposed to figurative painting.
Yeah,
How
that's
did
right.
you find that it shaped your commitment to figurative painting? And is like there
Yeah.
anything that you learned from abstract expressionism that you implement in your figurative painting, maybe?
Well, what happened at New Paltz was that all of the faculty there, I think except for one person who I didn't study with, who was more of an academic painter, figurative painter, all of them were deeply influenced by expressionism,
Hmm.
abstract expressionism, and some form of American expressionism. This, I would say, the New York, what they call the New York School of Expressionism. I had to really kind of get into what they call action painting, which is very heavy brush painting, drippy painting, and I had to incorporate that into my figurative work. And it seemed like, you know, I could do it, you know, but it wasn't, I was always, it just was, it didn't seem natural to me, but I experienced that I did okay. They really kind of frowned upon more of you know, a style that seemed less abstract, you know, but they let me look at an expressionist named Soutine, Chaim Soutine. And I did, and I fell in love with Chaim Soutine. And I also, the German expressionists, they didn't mind them. So they kind of like set these barriers, which was really stupid, but that's, you know, a lot of times art professors in colleges, I would say for the most part, are extremely dogmatic. They're not really open-minded. They have their own way, and that's it.
Hmm.
And
I find
so,
that ironic.
huh?
I feel like that's very ironic.
Yeah, it should. Well, I think it might be ironic. It is ironic, I would think, but it is actually that is the case, and it could be the case on both ends. It could be the case for more traditional painters who just cannot stand anything abstract, and it certainly is the case with abstract painters who think that anything representational is turning the clock back.
Yeah.
So I happen to be in a group that felt the other way, like anything representational was turning the clock back, and they would say to me, "Oh well, Dan, figurative painting is 19th century." Well, as my good friend Mel Leipzig says, well, figurative painting is not just 19th century. It's 17th century, 18th century, 16th century, 15th, 14th, 13th, going all the way back to cave painting, this big figurative painting. And in fact, and this is true, in fact, the two greatest modernists of the 20th century, both Picasso and Matisse, were figurative artists. They
Hmm.
always painted the figure. They weren't purely totally abstract. So that's also very true. So they had their really, it was silly. But they had their ways, and unfortunately, if they're running the department, if you want to survive in a program, you have to kind of abide by their rules. So anyway, I got through that program, and then there happened to be an artist talk. Often, college programs will invite artists to come in and present their work and talk. It happens, and it still might happen, I don't know, but it happens in most programs, where they invite an artist to come in and go
Yeah.
do a studio talk with students, and show the studio their work through slide presentations. So anyway, this artist named Leonard Anderson, you may not know of him, but in the 80s, he was a well-known figurative artist
Hmm.
in New York City. He came up, he was invited. I don't even know why they invited this guy. I don't know who invited him, but he was invited up to come, and he gave a talk on his work. And his work is much more traditional than anything they would touch. And it also kind of clarified to me that, boy, you can be a figurative artist perfectly fine in this time. And what they're trying to tell me is kind of nonsense. So
Hmm.
it kind of pulled, it was sort of the emperor's new clothes, where you see the person for who they are. It's just,
Hmm.
it's silly, and I was really kind of really strongly, it was a strong affirmation to my natural inclination to be a more traditionally based
Yeah.
figurative artist.
Okay.
So
So
I went to Brooklyn
here.
College. I applied. When he came to our studios to look, I approached him and I said, I really would like to study at Brooklyn College. And he goes, well, apply. It's competitive to get in, but why don't you apply? So I did. I applied to Brooklyn College, and I didn't apply to any other program. It was a small program, and it was competitive to get in, but I got in.
That's great.
So yeah, so I got into Brooklyn, and I immediately studied with Leonard Anderson, but I also studied with Lois Dodd and Philip Pearlstein. And those three artists they're all really great artists of the last 50 years. Or 60 years. They're just great. Um, and they all emerge from that period of time in American art post World War II, abstract expressionists, which dominated the scene, but there was figurative artists who came from that and reestablished the figure and representation as a valuable and vital subject. And so they went against the grain, those artists, and they made it a lot easier for a lot of younger artists like me, to follow my path.